Well, I want to welcome everyone today, especially if you're watching in a living room, on your deck. If you're outside, it could be a little warm today, but we are excited that you've joined us as we begin a brand new series. And that's not the only thing that I'm excited about, because today at all of our campuses, there are volunteers in the room training and getting ready. And so I'm excited to have people in the room here. And I know at all of our locations, everyone is excited because next week is when we open for public in-person services again. And we hope that you'll all join us. And as I mentioned a moment ago, we are launching a brand new series today called Waiting. Now, for all of us, when we hear that word waiting, we are all experts at waiting at this point. We were all waiting in our houses. We have been waiting to hear news on how the phases are going to go. We constantly have been waiting. And what we're going to talk about in this series is about waiting on God. Because so many times in our lives, we find ourselves in a place that we wish God would move fast. We wish we could see the end of the journey, but we find ourselves in a place of waiting. And to look at this idea, we are going to look at the story of Joseph. Now, you may know of some Josephs in the Bible. The one we're going to look at is the Joseph that is found in Genesis. And it's found in Genesis chapter 37. And this Joseph really has an amazing story of waiting. And it's a lifetime of waiting in many ways. And there's so much we can learn from him as we go through this series. Today, what we're going to look at is this idea of waiting on a dream. Now, if you're like me, you have dreams. And I'm not talking about when you close your eyes and you dream at night. I'm talking about a dream that is your want, your desire, your destination. If you could have it, you would just be the happiest person in the world kind of dream. And for most of us, this starts when we're a child. And for me, I can remember being 4 years old and having a dream. And so here's a picture of me at 4 years old beginning to live my dream. And I know what you're all thinking. Some of you, it's hard to believe I was 4 years old at one time, but for others of you, it is hard to believe I was ever that cute, I'm sure. But what I'm doing right there is I am beginning to craft and mold this dream. This dream of being a farmer like my dad and my uncle and my grandpas. And I can tell you my field, it was the living room of that house. And I would push that combine. And in fact, I've brought it with me today. This is the exact combine that you saw in that picture. And it really is something that even when I look at this, I think about it, all the dreams that I had. And the cool thing about my dream, being 4 years old, is I actually got to live it. You know, some of us don't get to live our dreams, but this dream I actually got to live. And so as I grew up, I got to one day, instead of just dreaming and pushing around this combine, I remember being 25 years old and really fully invested in our family farm. And I remember thinking one afternoon, wow, that 4-year-old kid has achieved his dream. You know, but what's weird was that dream was a little different when I got there than what I dreamed about when I was pushing this combine around on the floor. It was very different. And so I want you to ask yourself this today, is what were your dreams as a kid? Now, some of you might say, my dream was to be like Mike. You know, that documentary's out there about Michael Jordan, but many of us were disappointed because we didn't surpass 6 feet and we can't jump, and so that dream didn't go very far. But you have some kind of dream, and maybe you've even gotten to live that dream out. You know, some of us actually do. But those dreams really, even this dream for me, when I think about it, it really was a dream all about me. It was about what I wanted for my life. It was about what I wanted to accomplish. And it was very me-centered. You know, many of our dreams are me-centered like that, aren't they? It's like, especially when we're kids, we're not thinking about anyone else. But today what we're going to talk about is a different kind of dream. A God-given dream. You see, God-given dreams are very different than the me-centered dreams that we often have. And we're going to learn from Joseph about a God-given dream that God delivered to him. Now, we're going to pick the reading up in Genesis 37, but a little background on Joseph. Like Joseph, when we pick this text up, we actually find him at the age of 17. And he has many older brothers. He's the youngest at this point. And for him, when he looks out into the fields and he sees his brothers working, he kind of has an arrogance about himself. And the reason he does is because he's his father's favorite. And the reason we know that is because Joseph received a very special gift from his father that none of the other sons received. And that was a coat of many colors. Some of you might be familiar with that story. Now, some of you are thinking, what's the big deal about a coat with many colors? It's kind of like the older sibling like I was. I got a jean jacket. How many of you remember jean jackets? And my younger siblings got leather jackets. And I feel like I got ripped off, right? That's how you feel. And it created resentment. And this is how Joseph's brothers felt about him. Now, if this wasn't enough, he was kind of cocky. And also, Joseph receives a dream. And that's where we're going to pick up the reading in Genesis chapter 37, verse 5. You can open your Pathway Church app, or you can follow along on the screen. It says there, Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. He said to them, listen to this dream I had. When we were binding sheaves of grain out in the field, suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it. His brothers said to him, do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us? And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. Now, I'm guessing Joseph didn't walk up very humbly and tell them that he had this dream, because I actually think he received this dream and he thought, this dream is about me going straight to power. And that's exactly what his brothers thought. Now, if Joseph was my brother, I probably would have took him out back and whooped him. That's just what I would do. Because he's lipping off, he's acting all cocky, right? That's how his brothers felt that day. But what no one really understood was this dream was not a me-centered Joseph dream. It actually was a God-given dream, and he actually has another dream that's very similar to it. It says there, as we pick up the reading in verse 9, then he had another dream, and he told it to his brothers. Listen, he said, I had another dream, and this time the sun and the moon and the 11 stars were bowing down to me. When he told his father, as well as his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, what is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you? His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. Now, what we see in these two dreams is something you would think really Joseph would love, right? He is going to be in power. And his brothers and even his father will bow down to him. Now, when we see this dream at first, we're not sure if it's a God-given dream, but we have the benefit of the entire story of Joseph to really help us understand a God-given dream. And God-given dreams are very, very different than me-centered dreams. And so the first thing that I think we can tell from this text as we look at what really makes up a God-given dream is the first thing is God-given dreams are for God's glory in his story. Now, when you think about that and you look at Joseph's total story, what this dream was actually about is Joseph rising to become the second most powerful person in Egypt. And the reason God orchestrates this is because a severe famine will come over the land. And Joseph's father and brothers will be in desperate need of help. And the person that can help them is Joseph because of his high power, because of what these dreams foretold. They were God-given dreams. And so this dream is about saving his family, but it's not just about saving his family. Because you see, Joseph's family becomes the nation of Israel. And out of the nation of Israel comes Jesus, the Messiah, who saves the world from their sins. You see, this is not a me-centered dream about Joseph. This is a story. It's God's story that is used for his glory, and Joseph is being used in the middle of this. You know, Joseph's mindset, as we see and we read about him in this story of really going to peaks, it's not just straight up, but it's a hard journey. But he has a mindset of being faithful to God and understanding it's for his glory. You know, we actually read a text in Psalms 115 that says this about this kind of mindset that we must have. It says, "Not to us, Lord, not to us, but to your name be the glory because of your love and faithfulness." You see, this is the mindset of a person who is pursuing a God-given dream, because it's not about us, it's about God and what he wants to see happen. You know, as I thought about what we can learn from Joseph, I thought of a conversation I actually had with our retired senior pastor, Gene Carlson, who just recently passed away over the past several months. And when I was actually faced with this idea that maybe God's dream wasn't this anymore for me, but a God-given dream was me to go into full-time ministry, I had lunch with Gene, and I just kind of laid it all on the table for him. And I remember Gene looking me in the eye, and he says, "You'll know it's God when you don't care who gets the credit, and you're willing to give all the credit to God, and you'll pursue it like it's your own." You know, when he said that to me, it was something that maybe I hadn't really thought about before. That to understand that when we are pursuing a God-given dream, like, we give up our right to take credit. We give up our right to really be acknowledged because it's God's story that is being played out. The second thing that I think we can learn is God-given dreams are many faith-filled steps away. Now, if you come to Pathway Church frequently, you'll hear us say that God is one step away, and he is. If you're far from him, he's not far from you. And so it's just one step, and we can be in a relationship with him. But a God-given dream, and here's kind of the bad news, it is many faith-filled steps away. You see, for you and I, what we want is we want a quick rise to the dream, to the accomplishment. But it's very different than we think. The writer of Proverbs in Proverbs 16:9 said this. This is what we do. In their hearts, humans plan their course. So we plan our course. But the Lord establishes their steps. You see, it's really a faith-filled step, one after the other. And very frequently, one is harder than the next. You know, when we look at the life of Joseph, we actually see this. We see this idea because what happens for Joseph is he just doesn't land as second in command in Egypt. He actually takes a few steps back. His brothers first sell him into slavery. That doesn't look like the dream that he saw, but he was faithful. And he actually rose and became the second or the most powerful in the household. And then when you think he's going to accomplish the dream and maybe it's about to happen, he gets thrown in prison. You see, and then at that point, God orchestrates something very supernatural to put him second in command in Egypt and ultimately to save his family and to ultimately save the world. Now, when you think about that, that's really what a God-given dream always looks like. It is never like this. It is full of winds and turns, and it's one faith-filled step after another. You know, as I talked to Pastor Carter at lunch, probably it's been 10 years ago, I was kind of wrestling with this same idea of what does this look like? How do I know if I'm really following God's dream for my life? And I will never forget what he told me because it disappointed me so much that day. Is he told me that you will take one scary step and then God will confirm it, and then you'll take another scary step and he'll confirm it, and many times each step is a little scarier than the other. That is not what I wanted to hear that day. But you know, when you look at Joseph's story and you understand people who have really embraced a God-given dream that gives life to the world for their life, that is generally what the journey looks like. Now, you know, when I think we look at our world around us right now, and I think we live in a world that needs followers of Jesus to have a God-given dream. Like, we can't just worry about our own dreams. You know, when you see the things that are going on, and if you've seen all the civil unrest and you've seen the pain that the murder of George Floyd has brought out, I think it was all right under the surface. But as soon as that happened, it was like an explosion. And for many of us, as we watch the news, I think we see a nightmare. It's like a nightmare that's happening in our streets. It's a nightmare that's happening in our country. And for some, it's a nightmare that's actually been going on for quite a while. But you know, as I thought about this and we think about this idea of a God-given dream like Joseph had, how he faithfully pursued it, is I think today, even in this moment in time, is that some just see a nightmare, but others see a God-given dream. You know, honestly, earlier this week and even last week, I think as I laid in bed and I couldn't sleep and I prayed about all the things that are going on, it felt like a nightmare. But I think there's been some things that have helped me maybe start seeing the God-given dream in our midst. You know, I had a realization that I don't understand. You know, it's hard for me to understand the pain because I haven't lived it. You know, I'm a 40-year-old white farm boy. Grew up on a farm. And so the idea of racism, the one thing I've known my entire life is it is real. It is real because I've heard it in conversations with people my entire life. I've heard it in attitudes. And my black friends that I have, they've told me stories in college that I can't even relate to. So I know it's real. But honestly, for me, I haven't known what to do about it. You know, and I know maybe a little bit of it is inside of me as well. And so I think when we don't know what to do about a problem and we're living in a nightmare, what we tend to do is we try to ignore it. And I know that's what I've done. I've tried to ignore it. Tried to ignore the problem, ignore the pain, hope that it would go away. And I think we all know today that it's not going away. The second thing that I've done is even worse, is I've dismissed it. And I think for the last week on Facebook, watching some of the comments, I think that's the one thing I've seen in myself, is there's been times in my life when I've heard the stories of our black brothers and sisters who have a very different life, a very different reality than I do. And I've kind of dismissed it. And I've actually said, I don't think it's that bad. But you know, both of these, I think, are embracing the nightmare. But there's another option, is for all of us, we can embrace a God-given dream. You know, there was a man decades ago who had a God-given dream. And he was a pastor from Atlanta. And it's one of the most famous speeches, but I'm telling you, I'm going to show you a clip of it. It means a little bit more today than I think it did 3 weeks ago. Check this out.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream. My 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. Every hill and mountain shall be made low, the rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight, and the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together.
I can think we can all agree that's a pretty good dream. And it's a God-given dream because it united followers of Jesus, a black pastor from the South. And when you look at that crowd, you saw blacks and whites and all races together fighting for the same thing. That is the dream. In many ways, it might seem like we're still waiting on it. But actually that day, as he gave that speech, he got to see it. You know, when you think about where did he get inspired for this God-given dream, it wasn't about fame. It wasn't about anything for him because actually it cost him his very life. A verse that inspired this dream inside of Martin Luther King Jr. was this, Galatians 3:28. There is neither Jew nor Greek. There is neither slave nor free. There is no male or female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. You see, it was a God-given dream that was birthed in him, and it changed things. And today, as we think about what we see, that same kind of dream can happen inside of our hearts. But we have to understand the enemy of this God-given dream. He is prowling around like crazy right now. And his goal is right now to get you to pick a side. He wants all of us to pick a side. Black, white, Republican, Democrat, protester, law enforcement, all these different sides, and you can't be on both. You got to just pick one. And then you got to run to your camp. And so when we see the crowds out on the streets, we see sides. And you know, I think maybe as we see images like this, I wonder if Jesus would see this picture differently. You know, there's one day when Jesus saw a crowd, and he said this. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were confused and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. You know, if that doesn't explain everything, no matter what side you think you're on, we're confused and helpless because we need a shepherd. We need Jesus. And you know, the key to what you and I do in this moment is what Jesus said there, is when he saw the crowds and he saw the division, he had compassion. And you know, for you and I, it means we don't have to pick sides because we can have compassion. We can have compassion for the protesters to understand the pain that they're marching against. We can have compassion for law enforcement and their families right now. We can have compassion. We can even have compassion for those who choose violence. And I know for a lot of us, that's hard because we stand for justice. But I want you to think about the pain that drives you to that. You see, they're confused and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. And for you and I, we know the shepherd. And our job is to show compassion and to point them to the one that can ultimately bring healing into their lives. And so today I wonder if all the people of Pathway Church, if this week we would have a mindset of compassion like Jesus has. That this week each one of us would say, we're going to not just listen, because listening is good, but we're going to put compassion into action. We're going to reach out to someone in law enforcement and encourage them. We're going to reach across to someone who is different, maybe even get to know someone of a different race if we don't know someone. And we're going to show compassion. The thing is, it's for us to take action and to look at the crowds, just as Jesus did that day. Well, as we close today, I just want us to pray and commit to being that kind of church, that kind of people. And I also know today that there's many of you that are watching this, that you have never accepted Jesus, that you feel lost and confused and helpless. You're like sheep without a shepherd, but today you can receive him. Let's pray. Father, I thank you, God, for your love and your compassion for all of us. And God, I know as you look down from heaven and you see the crowds and you see all the things that are going on, we know your heart, that you have compassion because you see them as sheep without a shepherd. And so today, God, I pray for those of us who know you, God, that everything we do, that God, we would be the ministers of compassion in our world in this moment. That God, we would show the world your love. That God, we would not pick sides. God, we would stand for justice and we would show compassion for all those who are in deep hurting pain. That God, that we would bring healing to this racial divide that we feel. And God, we know that Jesus can lead us into what to do day to day as we follow the God-given dream that you have for us. God, I pray that we would give you all the glory and that we would take faithful steps every day to pursue that dream. God, I know for everyone that's watching here, God, I just want to ask a question for everyone. That this week, if you're at one of our campuses and you're a volunteer and you are willing to take one step of compassion this week, I want you to raise your hand right now as a sign to God that you are committed to doing that this week. Raise your hand right now. That's awesome. If you're watching online, I want you right now to type me in the chat right now, to say, that's me. I'm willing to extend that compassion this week. Let me pray for all of us. God, I pray for boldness, for courage, for your heart, for your eyes. As God, we are your soldiers. As God, we are your ambassadors of compassion and love in this world this week. I pray that you would show us what that looks like as we live that out for the world to see. God, I also know today that there's many watching this that have never accepted Jesus. They have never accepted the grace and the forgiveness that he offers them through his perfect sacrifice that he gave on the cross. And so today, if you're confused and helpless, and you would like to accept the gift of the shepherd that he offers you and the leadership of the shepherd in your life, I just want to invite you to pray this simple prayer with me as a way of taking a step into following Jesus. Father, I know that I have fallen short, and in my life I feel helpless and confused, and I no longer wish to carry the weight of sin in my life. And so today, Jesus, I hand that over to you, and I grab hold of the grace and the forgiveness that you offer me through your perfect sacrifice that you made for me on the cross. And I choose to follow you and live the life that's truly life, that is only found in you. Now, at our locations, with everybody's head still bowed and eyes still closed, if you prayed that prayer for the first time, I just want to invite you to raise your hand right now as a sign to God of the decision that you made. If you're watching online right now, what I want you to do, if you prayed that prayer with me, is I want you to open your eyes and look at the number that's on the screen and type the word next, and to step into that relationship boldly so we can begin walking with you. God, I pray for guidance for all of us as we live in these days, that God, we would be your people, we would be your church, and we would show the world a God-given dream that you have for each of us. God, we pray all of this in Jesus' blessed name.